Hello, and welcome to a Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings battle report. In this game, we're playing Old Dominion versus City-States, and the scenario is Foresight from the new scenario pack. To note, I am looking to expand my collection of Conquest from more than just Old Dominion, so I can bring more interesting and varied battle reports, but I have a project in the works for that is some time away yet. Still, hope to see it at some point on the channel in future. For now, let's play some OD versus City-States. So on screen here we have the broad lists for both armies, both the Old Dominion on top and then the city-states on bottom, and I'll just break down what we've got going on in each case. This is a Xhiliarch Warlord list for Old Dominion. Old Dominion has many very powerful warlords, but the Xhiliarch is a very particularly strong one. Particularly strong both because he is just the best melee character apart from the Fallen Divinity in Old Dominion, comfortably outstripping a Strategos there, but also because his supremacy ability and his warband are very powerful. In terms of the melee or martial characters in Old Dominion, there are some things to recommend to a Strategos' warband, but a Xhiliarch just has Praetorians as mainstay, which are exceptional, and Varangian as restricted, which are exceptional, and both of those are on display here. At 135 points, the Xhiliarch is running relatively light. This is a fighty Xhiliarch, and he has the Calamitas Blade of the Caelesor and Gladiator combination. That's what I prefer for my fighty Xhiliarchs. You can go all the way up to a full combat retinue to really juice, but that costs about 60 points, and you get diminishing, not like you definitely get what you pay for there, but you do get diminishing returns. Whereas a Xhiliarch with this loadout comes in at just 135 points, admittedly expensive, but has 6 attacks, clash 3, cleave 2, deadly blades, and parry, making him an excellent duelist, an excellent just clash addition to a unit of Praetorian guards. Then we have 5 Praetorian guards to put him in with a standard bearer. Now, if you have points spare, an alternate way to build the Xhiliarch, or perhaps an additional way to build the Xhiliarch, is to pay for Regalia 1 and the Legio Primigenia banner, and then also put a Profane Reliquary in the Praetorian Guards themselves, which will get that unit up to Aura of Death 4, and that can be very powerful, particularly if the Xhiliarch is not your Warlord, but in this case I wanted a cheaper option, it's a bit more versatile, and I wanted to maximize the benefit from the Xhiliarch's Supremacy ability. If I wanted to combine the two, you certainly can. You can take enough treasures, etc., with the Xhiliarch to have both, but it becomes very expensive. Finally, and as a point to note, I don't own a Profane Reliquary. I would just have to say that it's attached to the regiment, which under normal circumstances is fine, but I am trying to build toward lists that would be legal to play at CanCon, the big event that's coming up in Canberra in January, and although at the moment, frankly, I suspect that my lists are just not going to be legal to play at CanCon because of modeling and conversion decisions that I have made, I am looking into things that I might do there, and this list is pretty close to okay. I've got models that are 3D printed, but they aren't in this list, so my bone golems for my Archimandrite warbands, those are 3D sculpts, which I really, really love, and I chose because I love and I think they match the Archimandrite incredibly well, but I just can't play those at CanCon because CanCon is using the full and formal Parabellum rules for events. And that's fair enough, it's being run by a Parabellum staff member, I can't in good conscience ask him to make an exception, so I'm looking toward lists that will be likely to be legal for me to play at CanCon. The big issue with this one is that I've based my Varangians 3 to a stand rather than 4, which is technically obligatory, and so I'm just trying to figure out a way that I might do something about that, but for now, this list is pretty close to tournament legal once I get a couple of extra Karyatids. Speaking of, we have 2 Hierodeacon warbands. The Hierodeacons in this case are running without any retinues. It would cost 15 points to upgrade them. I would like to pay for that, but I just don't have the points. I wanted as many bodies and as much stuff in this list as I can, and that means trimming down the characters a little bit. You don't get a huge bonus by adding Arcane 1 to the Hierodeacons in terms of likelihood of succeeding at their spell that gathers dark power, but I do find it helps in the late game if you're looking to sling offensive spells. They've got quite a good offensive spell if you've reached dark power tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4. Landing that is more reliable because you're not taking a benefit of the Devout, etc. So that is where you want Arcane up to Arcane 6, or sorry, up to Priest 6 with the Hierodeacons, which I don't have in this case. It's a sacrifice that I've made. However, I do have 15 points spare. I could use that to upgrade one Hierodeacon with Arcane Retinue 1. Instead, I've chosen to give a 1 unit of Legionnaires with a Hierodeacon and Optio. This can help with early bum rushing scenarios just to get a few points on the board, and although I think there is some argument for giving that to the Legionnaires in the Xhiliarch's warband, what I've found in play with this list is that no, the Hierodeacons have to get on the table ASAP. They are generating dark power, and this list does actually need it, which we'll see why in a moment. Because I need my Dark Power, therefore I need my Hierodeacons on the board. If I'm going to give one of the Legionnaire units an Optio, it has to be a unit that will come on early and get into a scenario zone early. Hence, it's a Hierodeacon unit. Finally, we have one more Hierodeacon warband. It's just a Hierodeacon with a unit of Legionnaires. So we've got Canephors in the first Hierodeacon regiment. Canephors mean I have 3 heavies in the list, which gives me a decent chance of getting 2 Varangian guards on turn 3. Then we have Karyatids. So this is one of the things that I'm experimenting with in this list, which is a big ranged presence. Now it's just 1 unit, but Karyatids go pretty hard, in particular once you get to Dark Power Tier 2. That will bring them up to Barrage 4. They've got good range, very good AP, fluid formation once the Memories of Old are unlocked as a draw event, and just generally, this is a very expensive but very dangerous ranged unit. Now, Old Dominion is not necessarily a faction that needs a great deal of range. You can just like push forward and get into melee, because if you take attrition from ranged attacks as you close into melee, that's just going to fuel your Dark Power. You're meant to take casualties as you close and then be strong in the late game as Old Dominion. But because the Xhiliarch supremacy ability is so powerful, if you can get those double clashes with Varangians, your opponents are going to try and keep their distance. And what I wanted was something to force my opponent to come towards me, or to set the status quo in such a way that if my opponents just decided to never close because the Varangian guard was so fearful, I had some way of pressuring them. And I've tried 3 Karyatids, it's not quite enough, but 5 Karyatids is pretty heavy. So overall, I've played this list or variant of this list once already. It performed quite well despite some absolutely egregious reserve rolls, and this is sort of where I'm leaning towards interesting things to try. A variant of this list actually could just be to run, in terms of the statues, just all Karyatids. You could quite comfortably run 2 units of 4, and I will try that at some point, although it would be a bigger modeling challenge. And I really like Canephors, so we'd see. That's something that I'd have to test and to decide about. The risk of getting Varangian guards onto the table quite late possibly is outweighed by the amount of range pressure you have with 8 pretty high quality stands of high power range brutes. Now, in terms of the city-states, what we have here is a very character-centric city-states army that has some things that I like and some things that I'm mixed on. As the Warlord, we have the Aristarch, and I think this is kind of like a non-traditional choice. And with pretty good reason. Right now, city-states, in terms of their warlords, it's a bit all over the place. There are a few warlords that will probably be quite good, in particular once Clockwork Hoplites come out, although those aren't out yet. But otherwise, generally speaking, you would usually just see a Polemarch Warlord. The Polemarch Warlord gives a very obvious, very clear, very good buff. Nothing wrong with it. It's good. If you use a Polemarch Warlord in city-states, you are not doing things wrong. What this list is doing is it is taking an Aristarch Warlord, because although the Polemarch Warlord buff is good, it's just a 2/1 unit, and you can get away without that. And what the Aristarch Supremacy ability does is it has some like withdrawing and reforming rules, which frankly you're not hugely likely to ever use all that much, but you can. Really what the Aristarch Warlord ability does is when a regiment comes off the strategic stack, it gets +1 speed for the turn. And you can combine that with a variety of other things to get some scenario pressure happening. Because a regiment can arrive from reserve with out of the strategic stack, it's one of the few ways to actually accelerate your army onto the board. And although it's a pretty like that's not a huge bonus, it's not nothing either, and it is going to come into play during the course of this game. Otherwise, these characters are very heavily kitted out. So the Aristarch himself is paying for Architects of the Cities 1 and then the Standard of Last Oration, which is very expensive, but he's in the unit of Hoplites, so it is worthwhile. It's a big unit of Hoplites with a Minotaur attached, so that's going to be a 7-strong unit with him present. Then a Promethean. A Promethean is a fine giant. A Hephaestian is kind of better, but a Promethean is offering some support here. And what he's hoping to do is use the Promethean as a little bit of interference, but also to buff these big infantry units. Infantry like Hammer Anvil and Thyrean Hammer units. We then have 2 Polemarchs. Both Polemarchs have full Architects of the Cities, so if those Agema units that they are in come off the strat stack, they will have 2 impact attacks per stand. One Polemarch has lighter alloys and Atlantis Spear, and the other Polemarch has the blade of whatever it is and the Pramodynamic Globe. Now the Globe is expensive, but when you combine it with the Promethean in the list, you have quite good coverage of interference. And one of the things that our local city-states players are finding is that right now, so Selenoi aren't out yet, Chariots aren't out yet, and there are really no offensive spellcasters in city-states. City-states are a melee army, even more so than Old Dominion are. And if you are playing into things like Dwegom in particular, and Old Dominion sort of secondarily, you just gotta have interference. It just sucks to play into powerful offensive spellcasting without some of those defenses in play. So if I'm playing Woodrune, for example, I will put in a Sacred Censer just so I have some interference in the list. And in city-states, you pay more, but you spread that cover much wider. Otherwise, what we have here are two just small units of Minotaur Thyreans. Thyreans are fragile but very, very, very dangerous. They are probably one of the purest or most specialized, like glass cannon, hammer to accompany an anvil regiments in the game. And when you have an Aristarch Warlord, you do have some potential plays where the regiments can, you can have a unit of Agema pull back and a unit of Thyreans charge in to take full advantage of the serious damage that Thyreans can do. But then we have two big units of Agema. These are Agema with the unit attachments that will give them flurry when they come off the strat stack, and these are 5-strong Agema with those polemarchs in there. Now, I would say for my money, this list is going too heavy on expensive characters. Lots and lots and lots of points have been spent on that Aristarch and those polemarchs, which could be more stands of things to do stuff with. The army is just, it's not that durable. These are big regiments, like, 6 strong, 5 strong, 5 strong, but I really like Agema, and I quite like Hoplites, and I like Theory. Like, there's nothing in this list that I dislike, but I would like more of it. And I think you could get more of it by not having so many points in Architects of the City, so many points in etc., right? Now, that said, with 9 activations, it will be coming in below most lists, so at least here locally, 10 or 11 cards is pretty standard, so this list can reliably get a bonus to the Supremacy roll, and then it can use the City-States mechanic of the Strategic Stack to counteract that activation disadvantage, to the extent that there is an activation disadvantage in Conquest, and it can pull some pretty big plays. Agema are a regiment that I will talk about more as this battle report goes on. This is actually going to be a relatively short game, but I will talk about why that was and what could have been done to prevent it as we play through. And Agema are front and center there. Agema are a regiment that the more I see, the more I think they are very well dialed in. If you look at their offensive stats and their defensive stats, particularly if you have a polemarch to increase their resolve, there is nothing about them that is actually exceptional. They are quite good in basically every respect. They have good clash, they have good defense when you add in the shield, they have cleave 1, they have plenty of attacks, and they are medium. Everything about them is like, yes, that's quite good. And then they have fluid formation. And fluid formation, particularly when you combine with some of the mobility effects that the Aristarch Warlord and then the lighter alloys Polemarch allows you to play with, allows Agema to operate in a way that basically no other regiment in Conquest can when combined with that kind of weight, that number of stands in a regiment, that amount of offensive power, etc. And that's what Agema they are a game changer for city-states, but they are also just a game changer for Conquest. Nothing really plays like Agema play, and if you use them in a very direct way, where you just move forward and use fluid formation to get a charge extension, they're just very good offensive infantry. But they open up things that Conquest wouldn't normally expect you to do. And I'll try and talk about that as this game progresses, where fluid formation is a super cool rule and it can be used for more than just threat extension. So there are some things I would change about this list, but I very much like Agema, and the person who's playing this, Mike, very much likes Agema, and I do not begrudge him that. So how I'm going to try and present this report actually is I'm going to have the before and after of each individual round up there on the screen so that you can see what has happened over the course of the turn. One of the things I find with Conquest is, particularly because it can be a very long game with 10 turns, trying to be like, oh, what happened this turn? I can just see, so I can just show you what's happened this turn. We are jumping into the action here actually in round 2 because there are no light regiments in either army. And can we just take a moment to appreciate this wonderful goblin green flock scenery? This is an absolute blast from the past. This game is taking place at a football club in accordance with the ways of old, and someone has found and rounded up this old scenery, and it is just wonderful. This is the kind of like vivid color of the white dwarfs of my childhood, and I'm very much here for it. So, as mentioned, this is round 2, beginning and end, and the city-states have had a veritable avalanche. Like every single medium unit has come on, and I've had 2 successes. So in my case, what has happened is, by the way, we are playing Foresight, and you'll see the zones here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Foresight is a 5-zone scenario. So there's a lot you really can spread out and contest things, where each player at the end of the supremacy phase, each round, secretly nominates a zone that will be revealed at the end of the turn when you are scoring points, and that zone is worth nothing unless both players have picked the same zone, in which case it's worth double, which is a mini-game mechanic that is only just okay, in my opinion. Not in the sense that it's bad, it's very cool, but it's a lot to think about. You could really like get into the whole, what if I does this and he does that and I'll do that, and really like getting into your opponent's head. In my experience, when this kind of mini game is introduced to a game, it's actually better not to overthink it. I think someone once told me that paper scissors rock only has 3 levels of analysis before you begin to just experience recursion and you go through the same things over and over again. And this is kind of the same, but it is pretty cool and pretty fun. It's like just complicated enough that I'm happy to have it in the game. Now, only the middle zone can't be turned off, and so my plan is to press the middle zone and lightly contest the side zones until my force is in place. I've decided to bring on both Hierodeacon regiments. I'm not bringing on the Karyatids because my opponent is a little slower. He's probably going to set up. Not slower, but like I'm not under immediate pressure because there aren't lights banging down on my door. If there were like Inferno Automata that were really pressuring to close, I'd probably bring the Karyatids on to ward them off. But in this case, I have the luxury of bringing on both Hierodeacons. So on my side of the table, we've got the Optio regiment has moved up over here, and it's able to secure this zone just barely. It's able to just touch it. And then on this side, these guys have not moved up the full distance because I want them just to be able to move into this zone. Agema can threaten a really long way. And because I know that the lighter alloys Agema will be turning up, if they turn up off of the strat stack, they will go very far. They'll get a distance of the table. And then the next turn, their potential threat range is tremendous. Although they're just speed 5, they can go all the way up to speed 9 if they come off the strat stack with lighter alloys with the Aristarch as the Warlord, and they can fluid formation, which potentially flings a regiment further even forward. So the like maximum threat range of them on the charge is just colossal, and I want to just be kind of away from that. And so, although I have contested this zone up here because I want to score points, that's as far as I'm willing to push. In the center, we have the Praetorian Guard moving up because they are good and they are tough and they can probably take a charge. And I want to get them onto this zone and scoring points because I want to be in the scenario game so that I have capacity to give ground later if I need to. Now, for my opponent's part, he makes very clever use of the strategic stack. Of all of the regiments in his list, if either Agema or the Promethean come in off the strategic stack and get +1 speed, and then in the case of the Agema, they fluid formation, those units alone are fast enough to get onto an objective. And so what my opponent does is he uses that on the Promethean, which brings the Promethean from speed 7 to speed 8, which puts it at 16 inches, which is enough to get into this zone. Now, unfortunately for my opponent, that is the zone that I picked for him to not be worth any points, and for his part, he selected this one, which I'm not on in any case. So I've lucked out a little bit here, and that's going to be 2 points for me at the end of the round, which is just a nice little lead. Otherwise, we have the Agema and the Hoplites all moving up. This is the Agema with the Primodynamic Globe. This is the Agema with Atlanta's Spear. Probably that's the wrong way around because you want to be able to spread interference across your entire list, but it doesn't really matter because I'm not offensively spellcasting that much. If it was against Dwegom, you'd want those models reversed, but I'm kind of comfortable with the high threat regiment over here. And then we have the Hoplites in the center moving forward. Now, the Hoplites are not going to be able to get onto the center objective without using the Aristarch strategic stack, but that is an option that they have, and that's not going to get there without until the next, not this turn or next turn. And this is kind of just like seeing some of the value of the Aristarch as the Warlord. Like, yes, the Polemarch as the Warlord just gives a big, solid, direct buff to the regiment that he's in, but being able to selectively just pick a unit every single turn to get +1 speed is cooler than I think we've originally given it credit for. I would like to see the Aristarch maybe get like something else because the other part of his Warlord ability just doesn't work very well because withdrawing in Conquest sucks hugely. Like, you still take casualties for withdrawing. It's terrible. But this is cool. Like Michael, my opponent here, has been playing around with this, and I like where he's going. Finally, the only thing to note in terms of what else has happened this turn is that my Hierodeacons have succeeded their roles to gather Dark Power. So I'm getting Dark Power hooking up. I'm going to have 2 by the end of this turn, 3 at the beginning of next turn. So here we are now in round 3, start on the right, end on the left. And reserve roles have been relatively kind to both players. Michael's entire army is on the field by the end of this turn, and I've been able to bring on all of my remaining mediums and 2 of my 3 heavies. So that's the Varangian Guard. I've chosen to leave the Karyatids in reserve because they are a little faster, and because this is a Xhiliarch list, the Varangians are the star, like one of the big stars of the show. So we're really just posturing now. There's not much that has happened, and in particular, Michael knows that the Karyatids are coming on, and he's measured his ranges, and he's made sure to stay out of their threat range. Barring some specific shenanigans, on the first turn they arrive, if they march and shoot, they will threaten 26 inches up the board, and so he's just stayed back beyond that. So in terms of how things have developed, posturing is occurring with the Agema, so we can see these Agema on this flank have moved up over here, these Agema on this flank have moved around here, nothing is really yeeting forward. The Promethean in particular has not moved that far forward, he is just setting up, he's like he's formed line with the Agema, and I think that's very sensible in this case, just holding formation, not moving units out of mutual support of each other, and allowing those units, if one of them gets charged, the other can countercharge to support. The Hoplites have moved up maximum distance, and then the Thyreans have moved forward basically to fill gaps in the line. Now, there is a particular issue here, I think, with the Thyreans and how they are positioned, and that is just kind of like we have some large forests on this table, and how we are playing the forests is as obscuring, obstructing, and hindering terrain. And I really like that configuration for them. But what has happened is that actually quite a lot of Michael's regiments are caught in position where they may have to charge through forests. And the only regiment he has that is happy to charge through a forest is the Hoplites, who don't care about it because they're always inspired anyway. The fact that these Thyrians here are like they're going to have to sit in this forest for a turn, and then this forest here is really serving to blunt, like he outthreats me significantly, and the fact that these forests are there is going to blunt an offensive that he might launch, and like vice versa, he can use that as well. But I am more scared of the threat range of his Thorakides. I have ranged units. The only sort of saving grace is that the Thorakides, if they move in here, this forest is large enough that they'll be able to fully occupy it, which will probably protect them from the range of the Karyatids. But yeah, I think the Thorakides sorry, not Thorakides, Thyreans, apologies, Minotaur Thyreans really don't want to be charging through hindering terrain if they can avoid it. Now, otherwise, in terms of what's happened on my side, is that this regiment has reformed and fallen back. They did that in response to this regiment of Agema here. Now, I could have, you'll see here, I was positioned to move up onto this objective. That would have scored points, lovely, but the threat of these Agema, if I had fed these Legionnaires into that meat grinder, they would have just got an alpha struck in one go. They would not have survived a charge from this regiment. Legionnaires are made of basically paper, even with the Old Dominion not taking resolve checks. And this regiment has a spellcaster in it. I want these guys, this guy in particular, this Hierodeacon, I want it to live, and this Hierodeacon over here, I want them to live into the late game, because they become kind of dangerous spellcasters if they get to survive until Dark Power gets high enough, and they help Dark Power get high enough. So I want them to be around. These Legionnaire units are not expendable. The only thing that's really pushed forward is the Praetorian Guard. They are posturing quite aggressively, and that's because the center zone is worth a bunch of points. It's worth 3 points if you control it, and that's well worth doing. Otherwise, we've got Varangian Guards moving up here, Varangian Guards moving up here, and Karyatids moving up here. The Karyatids in this location, now generally speaking, what I'm finding with this list, I haven't played it a ton yet, but I've played it a little, or some variant of it, where the Karyatids want to be is behind the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard are my toughest regiment just by sort of sheer number of wounds. Varangian Guard are my second toughest. The Varangian Guard, however, need no help killing things. The Varangian Guard will fight and die, and they will usually win against, unless something is very heavy in response, like a Tontor, for example, will beat them, but otherwise they are tough enough to take on their own weight, usually, in most enemies. The Praetorian Guard tend to be a bit more like, they the Xhiliarch is very dangerous, but they don't kill as efficiently as the Varangians. So what I need support behind them, and because the Karyatids are size 2, they just see comfortably over the heads of the Praetorian Guard, and what you get is a really lovely force concentration, where these Karyatids now are like projecting force out onto a huge portion of the table, and the anvil presence of these Praetorians just puts me in great stead. In addition, Just in terms of minor optimization and mutual support, there's plenty of room for the Karyatids to fluid formation around if they need. And the Varangians have only moved up just to get into this objective here, which means that with a 12-inch move from the Karyatids to where they are, 10 inches is there. So if my opponent engages the Praetorian Guard, the Karyatids are in position to provide devastating fire support from within effective range, which if they aim and they have Memories of Old unlocked, which I do by the end of this turn, thanks to the work that's being done by the Hierodeacons, they have not failed a roll and I've killed one of my own stands, or I think I will next turn I'll have that unlocked. That is 25 dice hitting on 3s, armor piercing 2. Now, its range attack doesn't cause morale checks, but that is still a lot of firepower that will really do a number on something that's trying to grind through those Praetorian guards and help me concentrate force and win that fight. So at the end of this round, I've turned off one of the objectives my opponent is on. They turned off, I actually think, this objective, and I then ran away from it, which was ill luck for my opponent. So I score 3 points for the center zone, 2 points for a side zone. I'm not securing enough otherwise. And my opponent scores 2 points for the zone that he's on, and I think 2 points for securing 2 zones, which puts him on 4 points and me on 7 points when you add in the points I had previously. So I'm not falling behind in scenario, and that has allowed me to make plays like this unit here pulling back. If they'd moved on to the objective, I'd have scored 2 additional points, even though because I 2 additional points from securing 2 of these zones, even though this zone itself is worth nothing, but I'm comfortable giving those points up in order to preserve my force. So here we are in round 4, start on the left and on the right, and again both players are continuing to be quite disciplined. My Karyatids have shown up, which means both forces are fully committed, and things have gotten very hot, but no one has quite gotten into melee. So we can see sort of like here from last turn, I kept this Legionnaire unit back away from the Agema. They could probably make that charge if they wanted to, but they'd be heavily extended if they did, because this is the uber fast unit of Agema. So both units at this point are just both armies are still posturing. Neither unit is necessarily in melee range, and this and next turn are where my opponent is going to make a mistake, a strategic mistake that will probably cost the game. Now, my opponent is under both ranged and scenario pressure. I have over here, I'm securing this central zone. Yes, the Thyreans and the Promethean are closing in. My opponent has solid melee assets, but I am playing Old Dominion. I am probably, I'm because of the Agema, I am much less mobile than he is, but I am a stronger melee force, and he is almost entirely a melee force, and I have ranged, and he's under range pressure, so he feels under pressure. But the big strategic trap that is being set here is that I am just holding the Xhiliarch supremacy until a turn when it can do maximum damage. And if the Xhiliarch supremacy is allowed to do maximum damage, it will end the game. It is very strong, particularly if you have a good effective turn where everything happens. And what my opponent has done is he is committed to a rush against me. Now, he has the advantage on the supremacy roll. He is likely to go first next turn, and indeed he will go first next turn. But he has closed to knife fight distance where we're both in charge range of each other, and that means that many of the advantages his Agema afford give him nothing. He didn't need to do this. He could have been pursuing a mobility strategy. Admittedly, this house here does make things difficult in that respect. It's quite a large obstruction, but what Agema potentially allow you to do is pull back if you think you need to pull back, concentrate force where you think you need to concentrate force. I would make the argument that this turn has set up the conditions for my opponent to lose the game very badly, and we'll kind of see what happens there. Now, I think I have played this quite well. I kept the Varangian guards till very late, and my order here was very conservative. I'm continuing to actually pull certain units back. So as these Agema moved forward, these Legionnaires pulled further back, and I actually sacrificed a stand from those Legionnaires just to get me over into full Dark Power Tier 2, which has opened up these Karyatids, and they actually rolled relatively poorly, but they took a stand off of those Thyreans, which is not that much, all things considered, for a unit that costs 330 points, making a ranged attack that's aimed. I kind of rolled a bit terribly there. But you slowly bring the Thyreans down, you blunt the impact of that charge. I'm prioritizing my opponent's regiments that are the glass cannon regiments, and being a brute ranged regiment, you can do that. Now, I had set up a little bit of a trap here where we can see these hoplites. They were in charge distance of the Praetorian Guard, But not only will that Xhiliarch absolutely annihilate the Aristarch in a duel, but as I mentioned before, this here is within effective range of the Karyatids. So if these Hoplites had come in, if they'd taken that charge, they would probably not have done that much damage to the Praetorians. Praetorians are very tough, particularly against attacks without cleave or linebreaker, and they would have just gotten annihilated for their troubles. And my opponent has recognized that as a trap. And so Mike, we can see, has pulled these hoplites back. And what I've done in response is that I've reformed this regiment. And the reason why I've reformed this regiment, there are two reasons. One of them is accidental, but it paid off quite well, which is that if I get hit in the flanks, and that's what's going to end up happening, they are at least presenting lines in either side. But the other reason is that I would like to charge, attack, and clash into these hoplites twice. And if I want to do that and still be in this zone, I needed to be 3 stands deep. So I just reformed to enable that, but it is a formation that will accidentally serve me quite well when models come into the side of the Praetorians. Now, otherwise what's happened is the Agema have committed forward. They've committed forward into this aggressive position, and that is going to be terrible for my opponent, because what I'm able to do in response is I'm going to be able to move the Varangians up into easy charge, like 1+ charge distance next turn, and that will set up charge, clash attacks with the Varangians because I haven't used the Xhiliarch supremacy ability yet. Otherwise, we've got further withdrawals on these Legionnaires here, and the Canephors rather, have moved up on this flank. They are posturing basically. There's a lot of pressure over here with the Promethean and the Thyreans and the Agema. And in particular, I want to be able to I want to have enough resources in place that I can maybe not win against all of these, but do something decisive and secure this flank. I would like forces to be able to push around this way, and for these Legionnaires to move up and fill the gap. The only other thing to note is that in terms of many of my early activations, we can see that this regiment with the Hierodeacon, both regiments with Hierodeacons have continued to fall further and further back, and the Xhiliarch's Legionnaires have moved in to fill the gap. This is the kind of play that, as I play Conquest more, recognizing when to back your units away is like hugely, it's just super interesting that you're so used to forward momentum. The game punishes you for moving backwards, but it's often the right call. And I want those Hierodeacon units alive. They are my plan B if like everything else begins going badly, because if I get to Dark Power tier 4 and they start hitting with offensive spells, they do a ton of damage. They get 4 automatic hits. However, it's not going to come to that, and we'll see why soon. And so here we are, start and end of turn 5, which for practical purposes is the final turn of the game. You will see that the Old Dominion forces are not significantly damaged, apart from quite a few casualties to the Praetorian Guards and a few lost Varangians, but the city-state forces are virtually annihilated. And what has happened here is both a couple of, like, my opponent... I asked him about this after the game, and he said that because I was pulling those Legionnaire units backwards, he read that as me feeling threatened in the face of his Agema regiments, and he had sort of assumed that I would not continue to push aggressively, that I would not play as aggressively as I did in this turn. And what happened was that I came out the gate, and I delivered a haymaker that ended the game in this turn. I lost the supremacy roll, but it really did not matter that much because multiple Varangian regiments were in range to charge clash. I declared the Xhiliarch supremacy, and we went out the gate swinging. Even with bad rolls through forests, these Varangians and then eventually these Canephori would annihilate this unit of Agema here. On this flank, these Varangians and these Legionnaires would annihilate the Agema that were here. And the price of being able to launch those attacks was that the Praetorian Guard in the center got absolutely ganged up on. The Promethean charged all the way in. He charged for impact attacks, but didn't hit enough to cast a spell. Thyreans hit from this side, and Hoplites hit from this side, but the Praetorian Guard kind of could hold. And while they were busy holding, everything else was dying. And the casualties sustained there, these guys have actually broken. The Praetorian Guard have sustained too many casualties to hold fully, but they were still able to deliver a fairly significant clash attacks because like the Thyreans came into their flank, the Promethean came into the other flank, they activated, they clashed twice against Prometheans, they clashed twice against the Thyreans, they killed the Thyreans because the Xhiliarch was on that side, they badly wounded the Prometheans, and then the Karyatids finished it off. And so what that means is that this turn my opponent has lost 2 entire units of Agema with the Polemarchs, 1 unit of Thyreans, and the Promethean. And although this unit of Praetorian Guards are broken, they are not dead, and this is an unrecoverable situation. Like, the damage is just just cripplingly atrocious. Even if I take a couple of entire turns off to reorient. Yes, the Hoplites here will probably eventually win because there's only, I think there's 10 wounds left in these Praetorians, but the Xhiliarch is still there. He is capable of now dueling the Aristarch, who will have to, like, give up, that will break the regiment because I just have too many activations left. My opponent can't delay that. Like, it's just going to be bad. So we mathed out some sort of future results here, but what has happened is that a, frankly, pretty perfectly executed Xhiliarch supremacy turn into a terrible misjudgment by my opponent has resulted in just catastrophic damage. Now, what is worth talking about is how could this have been avoided? Because it could have been avoided. What we saw was both armies moving further and further together, posturing for a clash, for, the crease, basically. And city-states have the option of not doing that, because they have these fluid formation, high-power melee regiments, and Mike has done this to me in the past, where I've played a Xhiliarch Warlord army into him, and he has just declined the turn. Like, he's positioned far enough away from me. So, two things that should have been done here. The first thing is the city-states should take an advantage of their threat range. Because the Agema can fluid formation to close the gap and then charge and then clash, and particularly they've got the Aristarch's Warlord ability, and they've got lighter alloys on this unit over here. These units were way, way, way too close. These guys should have been all the way back here. These guys could also have been, like, many places on the table. With fluid formation, they could have gotten into a number of different locations, but they were much too close. So, firstly, they were too close. They enabled me to get charge clash attacks, charge clash clashes with the Varangian guards, rather than forcing me to use march charge clashes, which immediately set me up to significant advantage. And then secondly, the Xhiliarch declares his supremacy in the supremacy phase after the roll for first player's turn. And what that means is that on that turn, if your army is capable of this, you have the option of just backing the hell out. Now, he was too heavily committed at this point to do that, but if he had, for example, recognized the danger, it's like, oh crap, I've screwed up, this is bad. If he had put either of these Agema units first, he had the option of getting them out, where they can just fluid formation, march, and get like 10 inches back here. Yes, they will be facing away from the enemy, but they can just fluid formation around next turn and come back in. But this only works if you aren't heavily committed. Probably the best unit to do it with would have been this unit here, because that would have left these Legionnaires and these Varangians without any good charges. The best case would have been the Varangians charging into the forest, losing Inspired and clashing into the Thyreans, which frankly I probably would have done, but it's at least limiting the damage. Probably the Thyreans survive, probably. Whereas this regiment over here, although it can get safely away, it doesn't do so. It leaves the Promethean and the Thyreans exposed. They were too heavily engaged at this point. And I've had Mark do that, basically, where the Agema are operating more in isolation. So, for example, you'd have, like, the Haspists the Hoplites would be in formation with Thyreans and maybe the Promethean or something, operating in a tighter brick, and the Agema are more independent. And if the Agema are operating independently, then that lets them do these things where they just deny the flank. They just move back and away, and all of this force you've concentrated against them becomes useless for the turn, and the Xhiliarch's supremacy ability just fizzles. That is something that you can do. Particularly, really only city-states can do that, or some other very fast armies. But in this case, the opportunity was missed, both because Mike didn't read my intent as intending to just really hammer in, and he'd set his strategic stack. By the time the warning signal flared, and I said the Xhiliarch declares his supremacy, it was way too late. Cards had been ordered, so and it was too late. The armies were too heavily committed. But the options do exist, and Mike has played those games against me in the past to significant effect. In this case, though, turn 5, that's the conclusion of the game. I have no more pictures, there's nothing more to play. We played through, frankly, like, by the time the second Varangian unit had activated, Mike was saying, like, we probably don't need to finish this turn. But I wanted to get a picture, and he obliged. And that concludes the game. That concludes this episode of Conquest: The Last Argument of Kings, playing Old Dominion versus the City-States. More games will probably be Old Dominion as I ramp up for CanCon, if I am able to attend, if I'm able to get past those modeling and conversion hurdles that I mentioned. You can actually see in frame here these Varangian Guard are a deeply illegal regiment because they only have 3 models per stand, which is fine for local games and even is fine for non-official events. I just asked tournament organizers, but is not okay when you have an official Parabellum event run very reasonably by Parabellum employees. So in any case, I'm hoping to try and resolve that. I am hoping to play this for CanCon, but you will see, hopefully, some spires appearing on the channel at some point in future as I get those models spun up, assembled, printed, and based. But otherwise, maybe I'll try and borrow some armies. If there's anything you'd like to see, if there's any scenarios you'd like to see, or just generally if you have comments about Conquest content, please put them in the comment section below. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this and you'd like to support me, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link, which is in the video description. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.